Learning to tap into my instincts didn't happen because I suddenly became wiser. It happened because I spent years ignoring them and paying the price. Nobody wakes up planning to ruin their life. We drift off course through small, consistent choices that don't align with who we truly want to be. Instincts whisper long before life collapses, but ignoring them becomes easier with time. I eventually looked at my life and realized how many decisions felt wrong. My body had been signaling misalignment for years, yet I pushed those feelings aside without understanding why everything felt so persistently off. What surprised me most was that I didn't need a detailed plan of the person I wanted to become. My instincts already knew. Every time I acted against my values, a wave of discomfort would rise. But because I didn't understand the root cause, I blamed myself. Many struggles I faced weren't my fault. I simply didn't have the knowledge to interpret what was happening inside me. For decades, I carried anxiety that I thought was emotional weakness, never realizing it was a symptom of something deeper and more neurological. That misunderstanding shaped so much of my life. I didn't learn I had ADHD until I was 47. For most of my adult life, anxiety and overwhelm followed me everywhere. Later, I discovered this wasn't just from stress, but also from repressed trauma I didn't remember until my late 20s. The body keeps score, and mind carried memories I had long forgotten. That trauma, paired with undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia, created constant internal chaos. I couldn't understand why I struggled with things that seemed effortless for others. Instead of recognizing neurological differences, I convinced myself something was wrong with me, fueling years of confusion and self-blame. Growing up in the 1970s, girls like me were rarely evaluated for ADHD or learning differences. Research focused almost entirely on boys, and because boys and girls expressed these issues differently, girls were overlooked. Boys with ADHD are often fidgety, disruptive, or impulsive, making their struggles visible. Girls internalize. We become withdrawn, overly reflective, self-critical, and anxious. Teachers saw us as quiet, not struggling. So instead of accurate diagnoses, many girls were told they had anxiety or emotional issues. A whole generation grew into adulthood misdiagnosed, misunderstood, and unsupported, believing something was wrong with their character instead of their neurology. The truth is, kids with undiagnosed learning differences walk into classrooms every day knowing they can't keep up. That uncertainty fuels chronic anxiety. They don't misbehave because they're careless. They do it because their nervous system is overwhelmed. I was one of those kids. I spent decades battling anxiety without knowing the real cause. I was medicated for almost 20 years on Zoloft, which helped stabilize me, but never addressed the underlying issues. I didn't know the truth, so I couldn't understand why I still struggled. Misdiagnosis didn't just affect my mental health. It shaped my entire self-perception. Things worsened when I became pregnant with my first daughter. I had to stop medication, and the combination of pregnancy, unresolved trauma, and untreated ADHD pushed me into a severe mental health crisis. The birth experience was traumatic, leaving me terrified and overwhelmed. I developed intense postpartum anxiety and depression. Doctors prescribed medications strong enough to keep me numb so that I wouldn't harm myself or the baby. For a period, I couldn't be left alone. Family and friends took turns staying with me. Those months were terrifying, a dark fog that consumed everything. But even then, something in me kept surviving. Ironically, women often discover their own ADHD only after their children are evaluated. That's exactly how it happened for me. Our son reached 4th grade and struggled daily, interrupting class, unable to focus, overwhelmed with anxiety. Teachers labeled him a problem. We sought a specialist outside the school system and finally received answers: dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. Suddenly, everything made sense. My heart broke thinking of the countless children who never get evaluated because they lack resources. They get labeled difficult, lazy, or disruptive when they're actually working harder than anyone else in the room just to keep up. Understanding my son changed everything. His diagnosis wasn't a label, it was a roadmap. It helped us support his brain instead of blaming him for things he couldn't control. When I told his pediatrician how similar his symptoms sounded to mine, he immediately confirmed it. saying I was the most ADHD parent he worked with. He listed behaviors I never realized were signs: missing appointments, last-minute panics, forgetting forms, racing through life. Hearing it so directly was both shocking and comforting. For the first time, I felt seen instead of confused. It opened a door to understanding myself more deeply. When I asked why he never mentioned it, he laughed and said he wasn't my doctor. That conversation pushed me to get evaluated. When the results confirmed ADHD, I felt a wave of relief. But I also felt a deep sadness for my younger self. I mourned the confused teenager and overwhelmed young woman who tried so hard while unknowingly battling something internal. I finally understood that my behaviors weren't moral failings. They were neurological realities. Knowing the truth allowed me to reclaim parts of myself I had abandoned long ago. It felt like discovering an explanation for decades of struggle. As the realization settled in, I felt decades of regret surface. Relationships I damaged unintentionally, opportunities lost, moment of impulsivity I couldn't control. I carried guilt for so long because I believed I should have been better. Learning about ADHD didn't erase the past, but it gave me the compassion to forgive myself. Understanding the neurological basis behind my behaviors softened the harsh inner narrative I carried. I stopped seeing myself as someone who constantly failed and started seeing someone who had survived without the support she desperately needed. That shift changed everything about how I relate to myself. College was one of the hardest periods to revisit. I always felt like I wasted those years. Instead of studying or growing, I spent my time overwhelmed, drinking too much, and procrastinating endlessly. Every time I tried to study, my mind scattered instantly. My stomach knotted, my senses sharpened, and every noise felt amplified. I couldn't focus unless there was a crisis or intense pressure. I assumed I was lazy or irresponsible, never imagining my brain simply couldn't regulate attention without urgency. That misunderstanding shaped so much of my identity. Understanding it now brings both grief and enormous relief. Looking back, I see how often I relied on adrenaline to function. I survived through last-minute panic, completing assignments during all-nighters because the emergency gave my brain enough stimulation to focus. People thought it was funny or quirky, but it was survival. That pattern followed me into adulthood, thriving in chaos, drowning in routine. Understanding the neurological reason behind this finally gave me permission to stop blaming myself. It allowed me to see my resilience instead of my failures. It helped me rewrite the narrative I carried for years, that I wasn't undisciplined, I was untreated and misunderstood. Learning about ADHD also changed how I see others. We assume the hardest working students are the ones with top grades, but often the hardest working kids are the ones failing. Imagine showing up every day knowing you struggle more than everyone else, yet still trying. That takes incredible strength. The same applies to adults struggling with health or weight. People who appear to struggle the most are often putting in the most effort. It is exhausting to live in a world where you constantly feel behind. Understanding this taught me compassion, not just for others, but for myself as well. Carrying shame, exhaustion, or physical discomfort isn't a moral flaw. It's an invisible battle. Living with extra weight, chronic fatigue, or constant overwhelm requires immense resilience. Those struggles are often misjudged as lack of willpower when they're actually signs of systems under strain. Recognizing this changed the way I interpret people's behavior. Most people aren't difficult, they're unsupported. Most aren't lazy, they're overwhelmed. Most aren't broken, they're trying. This shift helped me replace judgment with empathy toward both myself and others. It taught me that thriving becomes possible when people receive the support they need instead of criticism they don't deserve. When my son finally received his diagnoses, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, not because labels define him, but because they allowed us to understand him. With clarity, we could tailor support to his unique brain instead of forcing him into a system that didn't fit him. I felt grateful for having access to evaluations many families can't afford. At the same time, I felt heartache knowing many children never receive the help they need. Misunderstood kids grow into misunderstood adults, and the cycle continues. Support can change everything, but only when the truth is recognized. As I learn more about myself, I realized my instincts had been guiding me all along. I simply didn't understand their language. They spoke through discomfort, misalignment, anxiety, and exhaustion. Once I understood the neurological and emotional roots of those signals, everything became clearer. Learning I had ADHD wasn't just a diagnosis. It was liberation. It allowed me to rebuild my life through self-awareness rather than shame. Instead of fighting my brain, I learned to support it. Understanding myself became the foundation for healing, and compassion replaced self-criticism in a way that felt profoundly transformative. From there, I began building habits that work with my brain rather than against it. I explored tools that supported cognitive function, learned the importance of nutrition, and finally understood the value of things like omega-3s for reducing inflammation and supporting mental clarity. But the biggest shift wasn't physical, it was emotional. Self-understanding allowed me to make choices aligned with my values, not fear. I learned to respect my limits, listen to my instincts, and follow internal cues instead of external pressure. Slowly, alignment replaced chaos. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living intentionally. Today, when I look back, I see a long journey filled with confusion, resilience, misdiagnosed struggles, and unrecognized strength. But I also see growth, healing, and deep self-awareness. Learning to trust my instincts required unlearning years of self-blame and finally understanding who I am beneath all the noise. It meant embracing my neurodivergence, acknowledging my trauma, and releasing belief that something was wrong with me. Now I honor my instincts. They are signals, guides, and reminders of the alignment I once lacked but finally found. I live more consciously, more compassionately, and far more in tune with myself.